And welcome back to the podcast here on our Detroit Lions 2021 training camp preview blowout. We just talked about the offense. Time to move on to the defense, where, as I talked about at the bottom end of our last segment, lots of changes, lots of new faces, new scheme, new coaches, which brings up a whole bunch of new questions. I guess, let's start with the interior defenders. Let's talk about there's so many storylines here. You got Michael Brockers, Levi Onwuzurike, Alim McNeill. Those are your locks. Those are your roster locks right there. Your second and third draft pick there, and the guy you traded for in Michael Brockers, the veteran of the group. Tell me, out of those three, there's enough intrigue right there alone with each and every one of those guys. But is there something in particular? These guys are going to be putting on the pads for their first time. Our first time really able to kind of evaluate their play. And they're going against a good offensive line. So, what's the storyline here?
I think the storyline is Alim McNeill as advertised, because I think of maybe any of the rookies outside of Penei Sewell, he's going to have the biggest role on this team. Being the team's de facto nose tackle, his ability to two gap and to one gap has been well covered, and it's been definitely advertised. So I kind of just want to see if he's as advertised, because this was a guy that, he was another one of those guys that Brad Holmes was willing to move up to get, but he just happened to kind of fall into his lap, and the Lions ended up grabbing him. So I'm expecting Michael Brockers to help elevate the play of the rest of these defenders too. He was clearly brought in because he is a captain, former captain for the Los Angeles Rams. He's a veteran defensive tackle who's, he's only been in St. Louis / Los Angeles, but clearly really well respected, well spoken. I think when he went on the Jim Rome show, I think that he definitely showed that he's a guy who isn't ready to settle for being the doormat of the NFC North or even the NFL in general. And I think he's really going to be a great tone setter. So Alim McNeill, Brockers, and Levi's just one of those guys I expect. I want to see his athleticism pop in camp, and it's kind of it's going to be. I think it's just really difficult to get a firm grasp on defensive line play when you're watching it in training camp. I think that's something that's limited to the games to see kind of pop on the film.
Yeah, I think I'm most interested in Levi, honestly, and it's because the reason is really simple. Is I'm expecting some pass rush out of the interior defenders this year, and he's the guy I'm going to be looking towards because he has that athleticism, because he has that short area quickness, and I want to see that early on. And it's not, like I said, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be going up against some good offensive linemen, but that iron sharpens iron, right? That's what I want to see. I want to see him build those skills against NFL caliber player, and I hope to see it as soon as possible. You're probably right in that a lot of this sort of stuff you're not really going to see in a game until you get into a game situation, but we also get a lot of one-on-ones, offensive linemen versus defensive linemen. So I want to see Levi blow up a couple. You have to imagine he might not be with the ones right away. So if he has to blow up a couple of those, interior guards that we were just talking about that don't have a lot of experience, I'm psyched to see that. I want to see that. To me, that would be the storyline, not the interior offensive lineman not performing well, because they're just as inexperienced and not as highly thought of. So I want to see Levi blow some guys up.
That's one of those situations in which collateral damage is justified, right?
Yeah.
We're fine with Levi kind of laying waste to the twos. Seeing Levi take care of Jonah Jackson, though, yikes.
That's definitely a good news, bad news situation right there.
Yeah, but then I think going back real quick to the Alim McNeill point, he's going to be up against, he's a top 2 center, and if he's not 2, he's definitely 1. So, that's quite the test for a guy right out of the box.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving down the depth chart here, again, really interesting storylines with some leftovers from the previous regime in all three of these guys: John Pennicini, Nick Williams, and Deshaun Hand. I guess to me, the guy that stands out is Deshaun Hand, and it's a lot of the reasons for that I'm excited about Levi Onwuzurike. He's another guy that might be expected to bring some pass rush, and this is kind of his last shot, right? I think he fits pretty well in this scheme. I think he has a shot as long as he's willing and able to do it. The good news is, like, he's been training with Michael Brockers, so there is, a drive still there. He's not necessarily, been beaten down by the last 3 years here. So I'm hoping he recaptures some of that magic, but I'm curious. I'm not ready to pencil him. I'm not really even ready to pencil him in on the roster necessarily. But he has a very high ceiling, I think, in this defense as well. Like, he could either be a starter who gets, 60-70% of the snaps, or he could be a guy that's completely off the roster. So I think this is a big training camp for him.
Yeah, I want to say that I think Deshaun Hand is definitely on the 53 when all things are settled. But it wouldn't shock me, Jeremy, for Deshaun Hand to be a guy who's in street clothes when it comes to game day.
Wow.
And he's not part of the 46. Like, that wouldn't shock me at all. So, but I'm a little bit more bullish on John Pennicini. I think that he's got a spot. Just because you have a rookie who also plays his position. It's one of those things where you want some veteran insurance at a position like nose tackle. I really hope the Lions move on from Nick Williams. I don't think that he really. I don't think he has it. Like, he got to Detroit, he didn't show it, and there's other off the field stuff that comes with him too, in terms of his stance on certain things. So I'm just not very high on Nick Williams. Like, keep Deshaun Hand, roll with Levi. You got Brockers. Hey, Kevin Strong's awesome. Like, give him a shot. That's just kind of where I'm at with it.
But I mean, let's not shy away from this here. Like, Nick Williams has one good season in his 8-year career. It came in 2019 with the Chicago Bears.
He's right next to Akeem Hicks.
And I don't want to speculate whether the guy is vaccinated or not, but he's clearly made some opinions about vaccinations on his Twitter account, which could be an issue this year. If a player is not vaccinated this year, the NFL is really looking to incentivize getting vaccinated, and it's hard to believe that Nick Williams is going to agree to get vaccinated based on his conduct on Twitter. I don't want to speculate whether he is or isn't. Maybe he's just, all into personal choices and has chosen to get the vaccination, but he's shown enough skepticism about COVID from the beginning to believe that this could be an issue this year. And that's something that, listen, coaches are going to consider. They just are. And so maybe that factors in.
Yeah, and this is clearly not a violation of HIPAA laws.
Yes.
I mean, the NFL is putting their foot down.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about it too. Taylor Decker said that he was somebody who wasn't going to get vaccinated for personal reasons.
Yep.
And that can have, based on the memo that the NFL came out with, that can have a huge impact on every single player, not only on your own team, but whatever team you're playing against.
Sure.
Because the NFL is not interested in kicking the can when it comes to games like it did last year, because that had to have been a logistical nightmare. And I'm sure that they don't want to do it again. So like you said, Jeremy, they're taking every step to incentivize getting vaccinated that they can, and they should.
All right, let's move over to edge defenders here. I think the top three here are probably locks. You got Trey Flowers, Romeo O'Quara, Julian O'Quara. Then that fourth edge spot is kind of interesting because it's between Charles Harris, Austin Bryant, and Robert McCray. But let's start with those first three first. Trey Flowers, Romeo, and the O'Quara brothers. Again, so many intriguing storylines here. What is most intriguing to you?
Is this the year that we can finally cash in your that we can finally cash in on you saying the defensive line is going to be really good? Like,
have I said that every offseason for the past 3 years?
Can we finally cash in on that currency?
Listen, we got Snacks, we got Hand coming off a great rookie season. Like, it's gonna be great.
You got Trey Flowers. Everything.
Nick Williams is hitting his prime.
Nick Williams is hitting his prime. You know what? I think that there's a lot to be excited about the defensive line, and I think it's a marked improvement from a year ago. And I think it's going to show up with hopefully a healthy Julian O'Quara. I mean, a lot of people were looking at the Julian O'Quara pick from a year ago and saying, that's the steal of the Lions draft. Like, that's a guy who had first round tape until he got injured. Best ability is availability. So we'll see that with Julian O'Quara, and if he is, I think that's going to do huge wonders to this defensive line in terms of its depth. Because I mean, if you can spell out one O'Quara with another O'Quara, I mean that's going to be dangerous. And we've made much ado, I think, about nothing when it comes to Trey Flowers' positional change. But I think that he's just going to be a steady guy. Like, just pen in like an 86 PFF grade. Like, that's what Trey Flowers is going to be for the rest of his contract.
Yeah. And you hit both the points that I was going to hit, which is let's see Julian O'Quara finally. And yeah, Trey Flowers positional change in quotations, which is not, like you said, I don't think it's really a storyline. Like, he talked about it a little bit in OTAs, and he also just did an interview with Corey Woods of Woodward Sports, basically saying like, yeah, like, I'm still going to be doing all these same things I used to be doing. I'm just going to be standing up at the beginning of the snap. That's it. Like, maybe I'll drop back to pass here and there, but I did that a little bit already before, and it won't be the kind of play that defines me. I'm still going to be a pass rusher who sets the edge really well. And so he's going to be a pass rusher this year, sets the edge really well. That's it.
Do you think that Julian O'Quara could end up being maybe like the breakout player of this entire defense this year?
I hope so. I don't really know what to think of him. I wasn't as huge on him when the Lions drafted him. But everything you said is true. Like, there were some people talking about him being a first round draft pick, and you know, I mean, everything's set up for him to be better this year. But he was drafted by, you know, a different scheme and, you know, a coach with something different in mind. So it's almost going to feel like a rookie season all over again for him, especially since he didn't play a lot last year. So I'm not sure I'm ready to see him come out of the gate, you know, firing right away, but it would be great. Like, that would be a huge, if the Lions could find out that the O'Quara brothers were the future of this team's pass rush, like, they're set for years after that. And that's, you know, something we've been looking for a while here. Let's talk about that fourth spot now, though. You got Charles Harris, you got Austin Bryant, who the Lions announced this week is going to start training camp on the physically unable to perform list again, and then Robert McCray. I think that, to me, that is not a list of inspiring names to me, which is a somewhat significant concern there, because it looks like Austin Bryant's on his last leg here, and we don't really know exactly what injury he's dealing with here, but he did leave, you know, minicamp with an injury. And you know, has only played 10 games, I think, or maybe not even that many through his first two seasons. And then Charles Harris is a former first round pick who hasn't caught on, and I don't have any reason to believe he's going to catch on here either. So I don't know. Am I missing something here, or are you just as kind of down on the Lions' depth here as I am?
Yeah, I know that you weren't really excited when the Lions picked up Harris in free agency, and I get the idea that he was a first round pick who has kind of, you know, really failed to get home at the NFL level. I'm hoping that the Tides raise his ship. And I think that just playing with, you know, a lot of other elite talent on this defensive line, like Romeo Okwara, like Trey Flowers, like Michael Brockers, I think if those guys can play well enough, hopefully that leads to Charles Harris kind of having a breakout season, a la Romeo Okwara last year. And you know, if he can get his numbers up, that's great. But I'm with you that I don't see how Austin Bryant. I know he's starting the, you know, training camp on the PUP list, and he can come off that whenever he wants to. But for a guy who just hasn't been healthy like his entire career, starting year number 3 the same way is not the way to make it happen. And it almost seems like, because I truly thought that this was one of the things to keep an eye on in training camp, was like Charles Harris versus Austin Bryant, like who's going to get that like last pass rusher spot. I mean, you'd have to almost think that it's going to be Harris, like hands down at this point.
I'm still reeling from the fact that you just called the Lions defensive line full of elite defenders.
Yes.
And that leading to Charles.
We're going all the way in.
You're doing it.
All the way in on the defensive line.
You're doing, like, I'm trying to preach caution because of what has happened in the past 3 years, where we've been like, this might be the best defensive line in the division, maybe in the NFC.
No, we're speaking it into existence this year, and the reason why, Jeremy, is I'm just hoping that Aaron Glenn is just he's the fairy godmother who's gonna come in and turn this.
You're gonna need a sweatshirt with his face on it pretty soon.
I love me some Aaron Glenn.
All right, let's move to the linebackers here. Jamie Collins, Alex Anzalone are your starters. Derek Barnes is also probably going to be part of this team as a fifth-round draft pick. I don't know where to start amongst that crew. Are you locked in with Jamie Collins and Alex Anzalone being your starters essentially, and what essentially is a 5-2, but also a 3-4 technically?
Yeah, I think so. I think the Jamie Collins thing is that guy's getting paid so much money. It's kind of crazy. Like when I saw the Fred Warner contract, like I saw the money that Jamie Collins is making this season, like he's in like the top 10 linebackers.
Yeah.
Which is kind of jarring because he's not really a top 10 player at that position.
I mean, but we saw that ESPN stat, like in terms of what is it run stopping percentage or something? He was in the top 10. Like there are parts of his game that I think go overlooked or underrated. The question to me with him is, can he do it away from a Patriot system? Because history tells you the answer to that is no.
Yeah, exactly.
But physically, he's fast, he's athletic, he fits. Like he fits the mold, theoretically speaking, he's the physical specimen that this defense wants at linebacker. The question is just, can he succeed in another scheme? And that's I think maybe one of the biggest questions. We obviously have a lot of questions about everyone else on the roster because it doesn't look particularly great at linebacker, but even the best player has a lot of questions surrounding him, which kind of tells you what you should expect from the linebackers this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, if any of these linebackers are going to capitalize on the defensive line's elite talent, I mean, the linebackers got to be the level of the defense that make it happen. But in all seriousness, I think Jamie Collins, obviously, like de facto starter just because of contract. And like you said, Jeremy, I mean, it seems like he's the kind of linebacker that this defense wants to have in terms of a guy who can get sideline to sideline. But you get into all that depth and you talk about guys like Derek Barnes. It's a rookie. Jalen Reeves-Maybin, a special teamser, like at best. Like that's what he's shown so far throughout his career ever since he was drafted in 2017. Like this isn't a guy who only made it through. I mean, he's made it through like 2 regimes now. Like there's Jim Caldwell, there's Matt Patricia, and now he's here. And the only things he's done is special teams. Now, Sean Dion Hamilton, Tavante Beckett, an undrafted free agent, Reggie Gilbert, Anthony Pittman. The one name that we haven't said yet is Jelani Tavai. Is Jelani Tavai going to make this team, Jeremy?
Well, you'll have to wait until Bubble Watch defense goes on the side of I do think he is going to make the team, but it's anything but a lock. And listen, I know fans probably got sick of all the Jelani Tavai talk during minicamp and OTAs, but it's going to continue, and rightfully so. It's a very interesting storyline where a guy is just, he was drafted for a completely different reason. At the time, he didn't fit what the Lions are trying to do now, but he's working like hell to get there, and I don't want to count him out. Like he does have odds stacked against him, and even if he gets down to his target weight, like he's still going to be a little bit oversized for maybe what they want. But I'm intrigued to see where it all goes, and the Lions don't have enough talent where I can say like, even if he doesn't have as much talent as Matt Patricia ever thought, there's no chance he makes the team. I think there's a chance he makes the team because who else is going to? Jalen Reeves-Maybin, a guy. I mean, I think Reeves-Maybin makes the team too because I think special teams alone will win him a roster spot. But like, how can anyone else say they have faith in Sean Dion Hamilton or Tavante Beckett or Reggie Gilbert or Anthony Pittman? Like, none of these guys have proven anything else either. So why not give the guy a chance who's working like hell to do it, who apparently has impressed some of the coaching staff early on? I'm not counting against Jelani Tavai. I think he makes it. The question is what sort of role he plays this year, and it might not be much of a role.
Well, I think you're looking at those top 3 guys, like Jamie Collins, Alex Anzalone, and then probably Jalen Reeves-Maybin. But when you look at every single linebacker on the roster, I bet you Jelani Tavai probably has like the 3rd most defensive snaps out of any of those guys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just by experience alone.
Experience is huge. Like, I don't think people understand how important experience is. to playing. Like you never know what the league looks like until you're in it. Period.
It's why rookies struggle.
Yeah.
Like point blank.
Yep. It's it's really simple, and no rookie is really spared, even the ones that look pretty good the rookie season. But let's move to the cornerback position, where we do have a couple rookies there, including fourth round pick Ifeatu Melifonwu, who I would say is safe on the roster, as is Jeff Okuda, Amani Oruwariye, Quentin Dunbar, I think, is also in that group. And then we have some questions. But before we get to that, let's talk about those top four guys. Is the big storyline just like who are the two starters on the outside? Is that the big storyline? Or maybe who's the starter in all three positions, if you want to throw nickel corner in there?
Yeah, there's a lot to shake out when it comes to the Lions, I think, base package and who's lining up at which spot at cornerback. But I think the number one storyline of training camp is, what does Jeff Okuda look like? Like, who is Jeff Okuda? And this is one of those things where it's kind of a catch-22 in the sense that, like, if Jeff Okuda plays really well, it's like, oh, well, look at the wide receivers he's going up against.
Yeah.
But he's a guy who really has to show up, and he has to show out. And that's the most intriguing storyline for me for the cornerbacks is who is Jeff Okuda, and is he ready to be the guy that was drafted third overall?
You realize you've put yourself into an impossible position now, because you want to see Tyrell Williams break out as this team's number one receiver, but you also want Jeff Okuda to just pop off in training camp. How in the world can we get both those things to happen?
A 50-50 split. Which honestly would
just every pass is either a touchdown or an interception thrown to him.
But then all of a sudden, now Jared Goff's throwing a bunch of interceptions.
Oh crap!
Now we're getting Tim Boyle talk at training camp, and that would be no bueno. So I just want to see Okuda out there in position. Like, even if he has like a little bit of Nevin Lawson syndrome, where he's just like in the right spot but can't quite make the play, like, that's fine with me.
Oh no, we setting the bar at Nevin Lawson for Jeff Okuda.
We aren't setting the bar that low specifically, but I guess what I mean is when I watched a lot of Jeff Okuda last year as a rookie when he was playing, granted he was playing against, the top receivers in the NFL for that one stretch, like, it just looked like he didn't belong.
Yeah.
It looked like athletically he was more than a step behind. I want to see a guy who's right there.
Yeah.
Like, I want to see a guy who's running step for step with Brashad Perriman. Like, I want to see Jeff Okuda bodying up with a guy like Tyrell Williams who has some size to him. So as long as Jeff Okuda's in position to make a play, I think it's a big success for Jeff Okuda in training camp. So try to twist my words about Nevin Lawson. I would never wish that upon anybody. But give me your thoughts on where Quentin Dunbar fits into this puzzle, because I think he's one of the more intriguing pieces of this defensive backfield, because he's kind of like the de facto veteran of the cornerback room.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to know where his career is headed, right? Because he had such a really impressive 2019 season where, like, if he would have replicated that in 2020, we'd be talking about him as a top 10 cornerback in the league right now.
He's not playing for the Lions.
Right, and but for a myriad of reasons, things didn't go well with Seattle, and it could be, he didn't fit in their scheme. It could be he was dealing with some off-field stuff, injuries, whatever. Like, it didn't happen again. And now you're kind of left with, like, kind of the Nick Williams conundrum here, where he has one really good year and then one not so good year, but he only has one good year to his name. So what do we think is going to happen? And I don't know. Like, are we just going to, wave the Aaron Glenn wand at him and suddenly he's going to recapture that magic? Maybe. I mean, I think I have him slightly ahead of Amani Oruwariye in terms of my belief in, and I guess, even entering training camp, maybe he's my CB2 instead of Oruwariye, but it's anyone's guess, right? I mean, who knows? Because sometimes you just have that flash in the pan season and then it never happens again. And I can't say for sure what's going to happen. We didn't see a ton of him in minicamp or OTAs, so it's definitely something I'm going to have my eye on. The other thing I'm going to have my eye on is as I kind of referred to before, the slot position, because it looked like it was maybe Mike Ford's job going into training or going into OTAs and minicamp. But I think a lot of people assume it's Cornelder's job. And again, we're left with a couple people with not a lot of experience, and it's hard to make a prediction when you just don't know.
Yeah. And I think that's to be said about what I said earlier. I think that every position is open for the taking, and it's just who wants it. Like, who wants to be the outside corners? Who wants to be the starting nickel? Who wants to be the first guy to rotate in? You're hoping that. Who are you hoping pans out to be 1, 2, 3 corner?
I mean, I think in an ideal situation, it's Jeff Okuda, it's Amani Oruwariye because he's your draft pick and he's young and he's signed for at least one more year. And then I don't know, like. I mean, maybe eventually you're hoping it's Fatu Melifonwu, but it's probably not in year one. And who knows if he's going to be in nickel or what he's going to do. But if I had to choose between Mike Ford and Cornelder, I guess Mike Ford, because he also brings you some special teams. So, having that on the roster. I mean, you might end up keeping both anyways because Mike Ford is a good special teamer. So if Cornelder wins the job, maybe you just keep them both. Maybe either way you keep them both. I guess I don't really have a preference in terms of who wins the nickel job, just the better player.
Yeah. The one thing I want to say real quick about Melifonwu, and I know people were really excited about him because of his athletic traits. I think Nick Baumgardner and Chris Burke did a good job of breaking down some of his film over at The Athletic. But it wouldn't entirely shock me to see him be a guy who gets very little, if any, playing time in his rookie season.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to start any games unless there's injury.
No.
I do see him getting some sub package work though, because he's a unique body type in that he's huge, and if the lines go against a team with like a really big tight end threat, I could see him being kind of a shadow guy potentially if they need it. Who knows? But I mean, who knows? He has to show he's ready first, and he's got some work to do before he gets there.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I can buy it.
All right, we're going to pass over the UDFAs at corner just because we're running short on time here. Let's move straight to the safeties, where, again, a lot like the cornerbacks, I think we have an idea who one starter is going to be, and that's going to be Tracy Walker. But then after that, you're left with a bunch of question marks. Will Harris, Dean Marlowe are probably the two that are going to make the team and fight for that second starting spot. Do you have... I'm going to throw the same question you just threw at me. Do you have a preference of who wins that matchup?
I mean, I hope it's Will Harris for the same reasons that you outlined for Oruwariye. Like, both drafted from the same class.
Yep.
Right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. And, yep. And on top of that, like, you just have a little bit more team control with Will Harris than you do with Dean Marlowe. So I would hope that it'd be Will Harris, but, I mean... he hasn't really shown a whole lot, so it's just that kind of seems to be the way that you can blanket statement a lot of the defenders, is that like these are guys who are like have been primarily special teamers, like Jalen Reeves-Maben and Mike Ford, and even looking at this list, like I think CJ Moore is a guy who could potentially, if he wants to take that safety 2 spot, I mean, it's for the taking.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who's shown special teams ability. So, I mean, that's a guy who wouldn't shock me if all of a sudden he's, competing for reps. But, Eric Schlitt isn't here, so we should pour one out for him. He thinks the safety room is the room that needs the most help on defense. Do you agree with that?
I think I do. Because, I don't...
Even more than linebacker?
Yeah, only because linebacker has... we just talked about how there are questions with Jamie Collins, but he's the one guy who's established himself as, borderline top 10 off-ball linebacker at times. Lions don't have anything that resembles that at safety. Like, I'm sorry, like I'm not ready to crown Tracy Walker as, fixed or, this guy that we've been banging. I mean, he's close to Deshaun Hand territory right now, where it's just like, we love the idea of Tracy Walker more so than the actual product of Tracy Walker. And listen, he could turn it around. There's a good chance, I would even say, that he turns it around because the Lions were misusing him. No question about it. But he still has a ton to prove. And so, yeah, I'm right there. Like, the safeties are a big issue, but I'm very intrigued in Tracy Walker. I don't want to seem like I'm slamming the guy, because I think him and Jeff Okuda are going to be fascinating players to watch, as they're not only expected to be better players this year, but like they're also entertaining guys. They're guys with very interesting personalities, and now they're going to allow to show them again. Now they're going to be able to be themselves, and that could do wonders for their game, and I hope it does, but we have to see it first before I start believing.
And something else to that effect too, like they're probably both going to be expected to be leaders.
Yeah. Yep.
And they're young guys.
Yep.
And it's
Good
time
point.
for the maturation process to happen for both these guys. I wanted to be upset with what you said about Tracy Walker and Deshaun Hand, but I couldn't. But I think that you'd agree with me in that I think Tracy Walker's path to success is a little bit easier.
Sure.
And not as many hurdles to climb as the one for Deshaun Hand.
Sure. Well, yeah, because, I mean, injuries is a tough one to overcome to begin with. Plus, the Lions just drafted a bunch of defensive tackles, and they don't have any safety. So Tracy Walker is the de facto number one right now, and it's not close, where Deshaun Hand might be playing second, third, fourth, or fifth fiddle over there at defensive tackle. Sure. Really quick, let's look at the depth here. D'Angelo Amos is an interesting name, a guy who could factor into the return game if he shows out in preseason. Jalen Elliott is a guy who spent last season on the practice squad. Maybe that year development leads him to kind of having a CJ Moore role where he's on special teams a little bit this year. Then you got Elijah Holder, Godwin Igwebuike. Any of those names stick out as a guy that you think could surprise people this camp?
I think you already hit the head on the nail with D'Angelo Amos, just because of that versatility, his ability in the return game, as well as safety. And with how wide open it is at safety, I think that any of these guys have the opportunity to latch on as like a special teamser or part of some kind of like depth. I don't necessarily see any of them as viable candidates to start, because I truly think that Tracy Walker is going to be like the comeback player of the year for the Lions in terms of, where we originally thought he was, and to where he can get back to. As far as that depth goes, it's a lot like the backup offensive lineman. Like,
go get it.
He's going to rise to the top. Yeah. And we'll see who can show out.
All right, that's going to conclude our defense portion of our training camp preview. When we come back, we got some special teams battles brewing that we got to talk about, and then we'll wrap up our Lions training camp preview for the 2021 season when we come back on the PODcast.